The morning after Femi's arrest, Kemi arrived at the police station armed with determination. She had arranged for his bail, but she made it clear to the authorities that Femi was not to leave his mansion under any circumstances. His bail was granted with the condition of house arrest, and Kemi personally escorted him home. Femi, sitting silently in the car on their way back, glanced at Kemi. "Thank you," he mumbled, breaking the tense silence. "Don't thank me," Kemi snapped, her eyes fixed on the road. "You're not off the hook. In fact, I've ensured you'll be facing this mess in court. Maybe a public reckoning will finally get through that thick skull of yours." Femi sighed but didn't respond. Deep down, he knew Kemi was right. Determined to handle the situation with fairness, Kemi reached out to each of the pregnant women Ngozi, Ino, and Titi. She invited them to a private meeting at her office, explaining that she wanted to hear their side of the story and discuss the way forward. The women arrived one by one, each hesitant and unsure of what to expect. When they saw each other, there was an awkward tension in the room. Kemi, sitting at the head of the table, gestured for them to take their seats. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "I know this isn't easy, but I believe it's important for us to have an open conversation about what's happened. Femi has caused a lot of pain, and I want to hear from each of you how you feel and what you think should happen next." Ngozi was the first to speak, her voice trembling with emotion. "When I told Femi I was pregnant, I thought he'd be happy. I thought we were building something real. But instead, he asked me to kill my baby." Her voice broke, and she wiped away a tear. "Do you know what it feels like to have someone you love treat you like that? Like you're disposable." Kemi's jaw tightened, and she reached out to place a comforting hand on Ngozi's. "I'm so sorry, Ngozi. You didn't deserve that." Ngozi nodded, her expression a mixture of anger and sadness. "I don't know if I can ever forgive him." Ino was next, her tone sharper and filled with fury. "Femi is a coward. He acts like he's untouchable because of his money, but he's nothing but a liar and a cheat. I trusted him, and he betrayed me. If it weren't for the nurse, Miriam, who told me the truth, I might have actually taken those pills and done something I'd regret forever." Kemi felt her anger simmering beneath the surface. "You're right, Ino. What he did was unforgivable. But I promise you, he's going to face the consequences of his actions." Finally, Titi spoke, her voice calm but firm. "I knew Femi wasn't perfect, but I believed his lies because I wanted to. I thought he'd eventually choose me, that he'd change. But now I see I was just another conquest for him. He needs to understand that he can't keep playing with people's lives like this." Kemi nodded solemnly. "You're absolutely right, Titi. And I want to thank you for your courage in coming here and speaking up." By the end of the meeting, Kemi's emotions were in turmoil. She had been furious with Femi, but hearing the women's stories brought a new wave of anger and heartbreak. Yet, she also felt an overwhelming need to mend the situation. "I know Femi has hurt you all deeply," Kemi said, her voice trembling. "And I can't undo the pain he's caused. But I'm begging you to consider forgiving him not for his sake, but for yours. Carrying this anger will only hurt you in the long run." The women exchanged uncertain glances. "I'm not asking you to forget what he's done," Kemi continued. "I'm asking you to hold him accountable while also freeing yourselves from the burden of resentment. I promise you, I'll make sure he learns his lesson." Back at his mansion, Femi sat in his study, pacing nervously as he waited for Kemi to return. He knew she had gone to meet the women, and the thought of them all recounting their grievances filled him with dread. When Kemi finally walked through the door, her expression was unreadable. Femi stood up, wringing his hands. "How did it go?" he asked cautiously. Kemi fixed him with a steely glare. "You're lucky they haven't decided to destroy you completely, Femi. The only reason I haven't let them is because I believe you're capable of change. But make no mistake, this is your last chance." Femi swallowed hard, his throat dry. I'll do whatever it takes." Kemi raised an eyebrow. "We'll see." As the court date approached, Femi remained under house arrest, his world growing smaller with each passing day. Kemi threw herself into preparing for the trial, determined to hold him accountable while also protecting him from complete ruin. But even as she worked tirelessly, doubts nagged at her. Could Femi truly change? Or was she setting herself up for more heartbreak? The courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the scandalous trial involving the infamous Femi Williams and his tangled web of lovers. The women Ngozi, Eno, Titi, Mariam, Kemi, and even Funmi were all seated in the gallery. Each wore an expression of hurt, anger, or quiet resignation. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Femi sat in the dock, looking pale and subdued, his usual air of confidence nowhere to be seen. Kemi, acting as his defense lawyer, was composed but stern, determined to make Femi face his mistakes. The trial proceeded with the judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, presiding. After initial arguments, Kemi called each of the women to the stand to recount their experiences with Femi. Ngozi spoke first, describing the betrayal and emotional trauma she had suffered. Eno and Titi followed, each detailing how Femi had manipulated and deceived them. Mariam reluctantly explained how she had been drawn into his web of lies. Then it was Funmi's turn. As she approached the stand, there was a hushed anticipation. Funmi seemed hesitant, her hands trembling as she held the microphone. She glanced at Femi, then at the other women. I have something to say, Funmi began, her voice barely audible. The judge leaned forward. Speak up, Ms. Funmi. Funmi swallowed hard, tears streaming down her face. I was pregnant too. A few months ago. But I couldn't keep the baby. I couldn't handle the shame of being one of Femi's many girlfriends, so I had an abortion. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The other women, already emotional, burst into tears. Ngozi wailed loudly, clutching her stomach as if reliving her pain. Eno shook her head in disbelief, tears streaming down her face. Titi sobbed uncontrollably, burying her face in her hands. Mariam tried to comfort Ngozi, but she couldn't stop crying herself. Even Kemi, who had remained composed until now, struggled to hold back her tears. The sound of crying filled the courtroom, echoing off the walls. The court clerk pounded his gavel repeatedly, shouting, "Order in the court! Order!" The security personnel moved in to try to calm the women, but their efforts were futile. The scene was one of utter chaos, with emotions running high. The judge, visibly irritated, banged her gavel with a resounding crack. "Enough!" she thundered, her voice cutting through the cacophony. The room fell silent, save for the occasional sniffle. The women stared at the judge, their tears still flowing. "This is a court of law, not a theater," the judge barked. "If this disruption continues, I will have every one of you jailed for contempt of court. Do I make myself clear?" The women nodded meekly, their sobs subdued but their pain still evident. As the courtroom regained order, Femi sat in the dock, his head bowed. He had thought he understood the depth of the hurt he had caused, but seeing all the women break down like this, especially Funmi's confession, hit him harder than he could have imagined. For the first time, he felt the weight of his actions crushing him. This wasn't just a game anymore. These were real people, with real pain, and he was responsible for it all. Kemi stood, her resolve wavering. She had orchestrated this trial to teach Femi a lesson, but now she found herself overwhelmed by the emotional toll it was taking on everyone involved. She addressed the judge, her voice steady despite the storm within her. "Your Honor, I request a short recess to allow the witnesses to compose themselves." The judge nodded curtly. "Granted. We will reconvene in 30 minutes. And let me remind everyone this courtroom will not tolerate any further disruptions." In the hallway outside the courtroom, Kemi approached the women, who were huddled together, still wiping away tears. "I'm so sorry," Kemi said, her voice filled with genuine regret. "I didn't mean for things to get this emotional. I just wanted Femi to see the damage he's caused." Ngozi looked up, her eyes red and puffy. "We're not crying just because of him. We're crying because we trusted him. We loved him. And he used us." Kemi nodded, her heart heavy. "I know. And I promise, no matter what happens in that courtroom, I'll make sure he faces the consequences." As the trial resumed, the judge addressed Kemi. "Miss Kemi, you may proceed with your defense." Kemi glanced at Femi, who looked utterly defeated, and then at the women, who were united in their pain. She took a deep breath. "Your Honor," she began, "my client has made grievous mistakes, and I won't stand here and defend his actions. But I will argue that this trial isn't just about punishment, it's about redemption. Femi needs to make amends, not just for the women he's wronged, but for himself. The judge listened intently, her expression unreadable. Femi, for the first time, looked up and met Kemi's gaze. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps remorse, perhaps desperation. But would it be enough to change the course of his life? The judge continued, her tone resolute. I hereby sentence you, Femi Adegbite, to 2 years in prison. This sentence is not just a punishment but a chance for reflection and reform. During your incarceration, you will participate in mandatory counseling sessions to address your behavior and its consequences. There was a collective gasp in the courtroom. Femi's shoulders slumped, and Kemi looked away, visibly shaken despite her professional demeanor. But that is not all, the judge added, her voice rising slightly. Knowing your privileged background and your family's resources, I find it necessary to ensure that you do not shirk your responsibilities. You will be financially responsible for every child born to the women you wronged. Whether you choose to marry any of them or not, you will provide for their education, healthcare, and overall well-being until they reach adulthood. Femi's face turned pale. The judge leaned forward, her eyes piercing. And let me make this perfectly clear. Any failure to meet these obligations will result in additional legal action, including the possibility of extended imprisonment. As the gavel struck to finalize the sentence, the courtroom erupted. The women began to cry, not tears of anger or betrayal this time, but tears of mixed relief and vindication. Ngozi turned to Ino, whispering, finally, he'll face the consequences. Titi wiped her tears, nodding. And our children will have what they need. Even Funmi, who had once harbored bitterness, seemed to relax slightly, as though a weight had been lifted. Femi, on the other hand, looked utterly defeated. He glanced at Kemi, who met his gaze briefly before turning away. As the courtroom emptied, Kemi stayed behind, her hands gripping the table. She had fought hard for a balanced outcome, but the emotional toll was undeniable. Femi was led away in handcuffs, his head bowed. He paused briefly as he passed Kemi. Thank you, he murmured, his voice hoarse. Outside the courtroom, the women gathered, exchanging quiet words of closure. For the first time in months, they felt like their voices had been heard. Femi's incarceration marked the beginning of a long journey not just for him, but for everyone involved. The women began to rebuild their lives, each finding strength in their shared experience. And Kemi. She resolved to move forward, leaving the pain and betrayal behind. But deep down, she wondered if Femi would ever truly change, or if his story was destined to be a cautionary tale for generations to come. During Femi's incarceration, Kemi maintained close contact with his family, particularly his parents. Recognizing the importance of addressing the complex situation involving Femi's former girlfriends, she arranged a solemn meeting at the Williams family residence. In the elegantly furnished living room, Femi's father, Chief Williams, and his wife, Lady Williams, sat with attentive expressions as the women shared their experiences. Ngozi, her voice steady yet tinged with emotion, began, Femi caused me deep pain, but I've chosen to heal and move forward. I cannot be one of multiple wives. Ino nodded in agreement. I appreciate the support, but I need to rebuild my life independently. Titi added, my focus is on my child's future. I seek healing and a fresh start. Mariam and Funmi echoed similar sentiments, each expressing a desire to move on and provide a stable environment for their children. Chief Williams listened empathetically to each woman's account. After a thoughtful pause, he spoke. I understand your decisions and respect your strength. To support you during this time, I will provide each of you with a monthly allowance to cover your needs until the birth of your children. Furthermore, once paternity is confirmed, I will ensure that my grandchildren receive proper care and support. Lady Williams added warmly, we are committed to being present in our grandchildren's lives and assisting you in any way we can. Kemi didn't respond. She watched him go, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. The women expressed their gratitude for the Williams family's support, finding solace in the commitment to their well-being and that of their unborn children. Kemi observed the interactions, hopeful that this collaborative approach would foster healing and provide a foundation for the children's futures. During the meeting at the Williams family residence, Chief Williams expressed his deep regret for the distress his son, Femi, had caused. As a gesture of goodwill and to support the women during their pregnancies, he presented each of them with a check for 10 million Nigerian nairas. "Please accept this as a token of our commitment to your well-being," Chief Williams said solemnly. "For any further assistance or communication, I kindly ask that you coordinate through Kemi. She will serve as the liaison between us." The women, though surprised by the substantial compensation, appreciated the gesture and agreed to the arrangement. Kemi assured them of her continued support and availability to facilitate any necessary communication with the Williams family. Kemi made it a point to visit Femi at the correctional center regularly. Her background as a lawyer afforded her the privilege to see him more often than most visitors, and each time, she observed him closely. Femi had changed. His once cocky demeanor was gone, replaced by a subdued and reflective man who was visibly weighed down by the consequences of his actions. On one of her visits, Kemi brought him up to speed on developments at home, including the meeting with his parents and the compensation provided to the women. "Your father has taken responsibility for the children," she said, her tone firm but kind. "But the women have made it clear they're moving on. You'll have to prove to them and to yourself that you're capable of being a better man." Femi lowered his head, his voice barely audible. "I'm grateful they're getting help, but I feel like I've failed them all. I don't know if they'll ever forgive me." "They might," Kemi replied. "But you have to show them you're truly remorseful and willing to change. Actions speak louder than words, Femi." Motivated by Kemi's words, Femi began writing letters to each of the women. In his cramped cell, he poured his heart onto paper, apologizing for the pain he had caused. To Ngozi, he wrote about his regret for betraying her trust. To Ino, he expressed sorrow for trying to manipulate her into terminating the pregnancy. Each letter was heartfelt, but the letter to Funmi stood out. Femi's most remorseful and emotionally raw letter was addressed to Funmi. He wrote about how devastated he was to learn of her abortion, how he wished she had confided in him, and how he would carry the guilt of his actions for the rest of his life. "I didn't deserve your trust," he wrote, "but I wish you had told me. That child was a part of us, and I will always wonder who they could have been. I'm so sorry, Funmi. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me." Kemi delivered the letters personally, ensuring that each woman received her apology. Though some read them immediately, others hesitated, unsure of how to process the words of a man who had caused them so much pain. Femi, meanwhile, awaited their responses with a mix of hope and dread, using the quiet hours in his cell to reflect on his life and plan how to rebuild it once he was free. "Funmi, my angel and my love. With a heart full of pain and anguish, I write this letter. I know that if anyone described me as a devil incarnate, they would not be wrong. I have caused so much pain, so much sorrow, and now, I am paying the price, but even that feels insufficient. Funmi, the news of what you went through has broken me in ways I cannot describe. It has left a wound in my soul that will never heal. And yet, I know that my suffering is nothing compared to yours. What I did to you, to us, to the innocent life we created, is unforgivable. I forced you into a world of shame and deceit. I was selfish. I manipulated you, lied to you, and in the process, I became a monster. But the real truth, Funmi, is that you are not the murderer they might label you to be. No, that title belongs to me. I, Femi, am the true murderer. I murdered your trust. I murdered your joy. And worst of all, I murdered an innocent life before it even had a chance to see the light of day. That child was ours. Funmi, a piece of you, a piece of me. And now, that piece is gone forever because of my cowardice and recklessness. How do I live with myself, knowing what I've done? Except God in His infinite mercy forgives me, except the innocent child unborn forgives me, I know there would be no better place fitted for me but the hottest part of hell. I deserve every torment that comes my way, and I will not resist it because it is justice. Funmi, I do not ask for your forgiveness, for I know I do not deserve it. But I ask that you find a way to heal, to rebuild your life, and to be happy again. If my words mean anything, let them remind you that you are strong, you are beautiful, and you are more than the pain I caused you. This is my cross to bear, and I will carry it for the rest of my days. I pray that one day you will find peace, even if I cannot. Forever regretful, Femi. Kemi read the letter in the quiet of her office. As her eyes moved over the words, Tears began to stream down her face. By the time she reached the end, she was sobbing like a child, clutching the paper to her chest. For 2 weeks, she couldn't bring herself to deliver the letter to Femi. She reread it multiple times, each reading reopening the floodgates of her emotions. She questioned whether Femi had the strength to handle such an emotionally charged message. When Kemi finally handed the letter to Femi, the room was filled with a heavy silence. Femi held the letter in her trembling hands, her heart pounding as she began to read. By the time she reached the middle, her breathing grew ragged, and tears blurred her vision. At the end, she let out a heart-wrenching cry and collapsed to the floor. Kemi and the others in the room rushed to her side, but Femi was unresponsive. She was rushed to the hospital, where she spent a month recovering from the emotional and physical toll. Doctors confirmed that the stress had triggered a near-fatal breakdown, and she would need time and therapy to regain her strength. Kemi stayed by Femi's side during her recovery, torn between guilt for delivering the letter and hope that it would ultimately help her heal. The other women, hearing of Femi's ordeal, began visiting her and offering their support, creating an unexpected bond of solidarity. As for Femi, he learned of Femi's collapse through Kemi. The news crushed him further, driving him deeper into repentance. His letters continued, each one a plea for forgiveness not just from the women but from himself and the life he had lost. Through Kemi's arrangements, Dare and Tommy were finally allowed to visit Femi at the correctional center. As they entered the dimly lit room, they saw a man they barely recognized. Femi, once their flamboyant, self-assured friend, nicknamed King of Girls, sat before them looking frail, humbled, and utterly broken. His once vibrant eyes now carried a weight that seemed unbearable. Dare, unable to hold back, was the first to speak. "Femi, did I not warn you?" His voice was firm but tinged with sadness. "I told you that game you were playing with those women would not end well. I begged you to stop before it consumed you. Look where it has brought you." Tommy shook his head, his disappointment evident. "You had every opportunity to turn things around, Femi. I remember sitting down with you and telling you to choose wisely, to let go of your reckless lifestyle. But you ignored us. Now look at the damage not just to you, but to those women, their families, and your unborn children." Femi lowered his head, his hands trembling as he clasped them together. "I know," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You were right, both of you. I was blinded by my selfishness, my arrogance. I thought I was untouchable, that I could play with people's lives and never pay the price." He looked up at them, his eyes brimming with tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to say this. I'm sorry. To you, to the women I hurt, to their children I am so sorry. If the good Lord shows me mercy, if he forgives me and heals me, I promise you this. I will not only right all my wrongs, but I will dedicate my life to teaching others. I will become a teacher of babes, an example of what not to do. I will use my story as a lesson for young men, to warn them of the perilous path I took." There was silence in the room for a moment, the weight of Femi's words hanging heavily in the air. Dare placed a hand on Femi's shoulder. "It's not too late, Femi. You've made terrible mistakes, but repentance is the first step toward redemption. If you're sincere, God will hear you. Start by forgiving yourself and asking for strength to face the consequences." Tommy added, "We're disappointed, but we're still your friends. That doesn't mean we'll sugarcoat the truth. You have a long way to go, Femi. But we believe in transformation, and we'll be here to support you in that journey." Dare and Tommy knelt beside Femi, joining hands with him. Together, they prayed for mercy, healing, and strength for their friend. When the prayer ended, Dare looked Femi in the eye. "Remember, this isn't the end of your story. Every great redemption starts with brokenness. Keep hope alive." Tommy nodded. "We'll be checking in, through Kemi. Don't waste this opportunity, Femi. You have lives to mend yours and theirs." As they left, Femi felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. Their visit, though painful, had rekindled a sense of purpose within him. Femi sat alone in the prison yard, the harsh sun beating down on him as he reflected on the past year. His once flawless skin was now weathered by the prison's unforgiving conditions, and his spirit, though battered, clung tightly to hope. He had counted the days since his incarceration, using every moment to reflect on his actions and vow to change. As the iron gate swung open, Femi looked up and froze. Standing there were two figures he hadn't seen together since the trial: Kemi and his father. His father, Chief Williams, was a towering man whose presence always commanded respect. Yet today, there was no pride in his gait, no authority in his stance. Instead, his face carried a mixture of sorrow and compassion. Beside him, Kemi walked with her usual composed demeanor, though her eyes betrayed a depth of emotion. Femi rose to his feet, unsure of what to say or how to react. For a moment, the three of them stood in silence, the weight of unspoken words thick in the air. Finally, Chief Williams stepped forward. "Femi," he said, his voice steady but soft. "It's been a long year." Femi nodded, his throat tightening. "Yes, sir. It has. I've had a lot of time to think about you," his father continued, his eyes searching Femi's face. "About the man you were becoming, the mistakes you made, and the pain you caused not just to others, but to yourself." Femi dropped his gaze, unable to meet his father's penetrating eyes. "I've thought about it too, Baba. Every single day. And I'm ashamed of who I was. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope I can show you I've changed." Chief Williams sighed deeply. "Son, forgiveness isn't just about words. It's about actions. You've made a mess of things, but the important question is, what do you intend to do about it?" Kemi stepped forward, her voice firm but encouraging. "Femi, I've been watching you this past year, and I can see that you're genuinely remorseful. You've written letters, you've prayed, you've reflected. But reflection isn't enough. You need to take responsibility when you're out of here, not just for the children you fathered, but for yourself. You need to become the man you were always meant to be." Femi nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I will. I promise. I know I've hurt so many people, but if God gives me another chance, I'll dedicate my life to making things right." Chief Williams stepped closer, placing a hand on Femi's shoulder. "Your words sound sincere, Femi. But sincerity must be proven. When you come out of here, I'll be watching. I'll help you, but only if you prove you're worthy of that help." Femi looked up, his voice trembling. "Thank you, Baba. Thank you for not giving up on me." Chief Williams's voice softened. "A father never gives up on his son, Femi. But a father also disciplines his son when he goes astray. I won't coddle you, and I won't shield you from your responsibilities. But I will be here if you truly decide to change." As the visit ended, Femi felt a surge of hope. He had lost so much, but the presence of his father and Kemi reminded him that all was not lost. When the gates closed behind his visitors, Femi returned to his cell with renewed determination. His journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt that redemption was within reach.